Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsay, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of SuperPsyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. SuperPsyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't.
Do you ever feel as though the limiting words of others define you? How about your own self-limiting beliefs? Do you ever feel like a victim? Has anyone ever told you that you sound like one? Or perhaps someone in your life might fit one of these descriptions. If so, this episode is for you. Enter Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman. Scott is one of the most creative people I have ever met. He is also a professor who has taught at top institutions such as the University of Pennsylvania and Columbia University, where he currently teaches. I have been a fan of Scott's work for a long time. The breadth of his work includes books which include topics that cover creativity and transcending trauma, and his massively popular podcast, simply known as The Psychology Podcast, that has over 30 million downloads to date. And I feel a kinship with Scott for many reasons, including the fact that, like me, he was placed into special education when he was a boy. Clearly, he rose above, which is an appropriate term because that is the name of the book I loved that will drop on April 22nd of this year. It has the powerful title of Rise Above. Overcome a victim mindset, empower yourself, and realize your full potential. I loved the book, as did Arthur C. Brooks, who said, Rise Above is the evidence-based manual we all need to be free. So listen in as Scott and I talk about Rise Above, and may you rise above as well. Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, who has asked me to call him Scott, welcome to SuperPsyched.
Can't wait to finally be on this amazing show. It's like a bucket list checked off.
Thank you so much for honoring me and blessing my listeners with what you have done. You are just my kind of geek. In fact, you are the kind of guy for whom this podcast was actually created. SuperPsyched not only means being super excited, but it means super connected to our psyches, whether it's feeling strong emotions that are positive or negative, and hopefully deriving the best data from those emotions. And it's supposed to be super psychological education, which your own podcast, which I love, is all about. It's literally the psychology podcast.
I know, right?
Which is the most incredibly dope name of all time. So mazel tov on that. Oh boy, Jewishness has been uttered within the first 2 minutes. All right, my man, let's get into your latest book. First and foremost, I'm so glad you wrote it. I love it. It was a breeze to listen through, but so edifying the entire way. So much of your voice comes through, and I just love your work. First off, you and I both know that writing a book is a spectacular opportunity cost. What gave you the green light to say, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to use the little time I have to write this.
Oh boy, that's profound. The little time I have. Wow. Whew. I hope I have a lot more time in life, but yeah.
Oh, I didn't mean existentially.
You didn't mean it existentially. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Got it. I take everything as existential. To me, it became so clear that I'd been focusing on things like intelligence, creativity, abilities for so long in my career, thinking that those were the unlockers of human potential. But what became clear to me is that the most important thing is really the stories you tell yourself about your own potential, and the way you interpret your hardships and your experiences and your setbacks. And that really was the true story of my life. I thought it was other stories. All the stories are true. It's all an integration, but I realized a big part of the story that I had not told yet, not just about myself, but about human potential, is the importance of the responsibility you take for the way you show up in this world and how you get after it, what you want to get after. And those things trump, in my opinion, IQ, divergent thinking ability, all these other things I've studied in my career.
Amazing. Yeah, this opportunity cost called time and the little that you have of it, given everything that you do. And you are, in so many ways, a Renaissance man, which we may discuss at some point.
I'm an autistic nerd, but I love Renaissance man. I love that better.
Fair. So speaking of autism, you and I were both in the Sweat Hogs. For those of you who remember, welcome back, Cotter. We were in special education. We were not understood. I was in it for actually a solid 5 years, and I tested well with the WISC, the IQ test that we were given at the time. And I was initially put in the gifted and intelligent class, but due to undiagnosed at the time, they had very ancient tools. They didn't realize that I was dyslexic and had ADHD of the inattentive type. So I was staring out the window like Hans Christian Andersen, thinking about the inchworms and the other things, but rather than focusing on what's going on in class, they thought it was willful. Anyway, I made it to the bottom of the Sweat Hogs. I was the worst of the worst, many of whom never went to college. Some of them are now dead and others are incarcerated in that same cadre. I marinated in this self-identity. I'm wondering, here you are, internationally renowned professor. I know you're going to really rise at me saying that, who's worked alongside people like Seligman and Grant at Penn, and now you're at Columbia. You've done all right, let's just say, but you marinated in that as well. How did your experience in special education inform you as it related to your sense of self?
No, it really messed with my sense of self. My early childhood really did. There's a lot of factors involved. Some I'm still dealing with. This relates to the book, just because I focus on my new book on hope for the future and really focusing on future goals. I'm not saying that the past doesn't matter, but processing the past is really important. So I'm still processing all that, including a really overprotective Jewish mother throughout my whole life. It's still ongoing, and that story is still being written. And so being in special ed, I felt a really loss of power, control over my life for many, many years. I felt like all decisions were being made for me. I could see that you felt that in your own somatic system. Mm-hmm. So maybe you can resonate with that a little bit. But I really did not feel seen, and it caused me to go underground and do illegal activities like white collar crime. I ended up becoming one of the most famous computer hackers in the world at age 13. I was called the Wizard, and people from all over the world were coming over. I think I actually was FBI's most wanted at one point. I probably should stop talking right now. Stop mentioning all this.
And this is probably post-war games. That was my childhood. I'm a bit older than you, but wow, that is so wild. So you were a hacker.
Big hacker. Interestingly enough, there is something about that world that does tickle my genome, which now takes the role of legal activities such as magic. I like hacking the mind, to do mentalism. So we can talk about that later as well. But in the early days of my life, it was the only way I felt any sense of control over my life. And what's interesting about that is that in 9th grade, when I took myself out of special education, and I said, enough is enough. I actually had a special ed teacher ask me why I was still there. And it really inspired me to see what I was capable of. In a snap of the fingers, I was no longer interested in being a computer hacker, and I never looked back. From that day forward, I never did illegal computer hacking. So it's interesting how our lives can change in a second when we feel like we've regained the reins of control over our lives. Does that make sense?
1,000,000%. What's so interesting is that did not happen for me until I entered college, believe it or not. I was a very late bloomer. In fact, I've often said if there was an autobiography that I wrote, it would be called The Late Bloomer. I did not come into myself in terms of identity or my cognitive development until it really began at 27, long after college and after the first round of graduate school. I remember I was sitting across from my buddy Aaron Kaplan. We were having dinner together, and I said, the cure is clearly, they're doing something really bad. They're talking about killing Arabs. And he said, well, it's not what the song is about. He said, it's about a book by Albert Camus. And I'd never heard of Camus at the time. I started reading, and lo and behold, I felt my brain go from the off switch to the on switch. And I'm just wondering if you could describe how you rose above, to use the title of your book, from your marinating in this self-concept of special education to teaching at the finest institutions in the world.
I mean, even just backing up for a second, before teaching at the finest institutions, there was a point where would it be possible for me to like get a PhD from Harvard or Yale to actually study at some of the best institutions in the world? And so much of it is not listening to other people's perceptions of you. I feel like I've had to do that my whole life. Not believing them. Don't believe them. I guess a really trite way of saying that is believe in yourself, but I think there's something deeper there.
For sure.
You're taking a bet on yourself and you're saying, well, I'm going to put in the work and I think it'll pay off. When I was in college, I went to Carnegie Mellon. It was hard. I got in the door in opera because I didn't get accepted into psychology. So I actually was
no way. What are we talking about?
Yeah, I was a professional opera singer.
At what range, if I may ask?
Baritone.
Of course.
Yeah. And I didn't get accepted into psychology and then transferred in the back door after I was in the opera program and studied my ass off. I was so determined to do well academically, but a lot of it was still motivated by like wanting to prove people wrong, prove my childhood critics wrong, which they long past cared about that. But hey, Michael Jordan creates enemies to motivate himself.
You talk about that in your book, how he would even create BS stories just so that he would fight harder on. It sounds like that's one of your life hacks. Yeah,
for sure. And I would say it served a purpose and a time, place. I don't think anymore that's the most healthy motivation. I want to be intrinsically motivated at this point in my life for things. I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone. In fact, caring so little about needing to prove things to anyone, sometimes it saps my motivation to achieve. And then I just get lost in maybe learning new magic tricks for 8 hours a day. Like, I don't care who sees it, or reading a scientific journal article, or learning something new, just sitting on my bed, popping out a book about time and whether time travel is possible. And just the being part of life is so much more gratifying and rewarding than the doing part. But sometimes we need to get through the doing part before we have that realization.
And I actually see them as feeding one another. The doing part gives us kind of the horsepower. And the other, the so-called supplemental, perhaps people might call it tickling a fancy, actually becomes spectacularly relevant in shocking places that you wouldn't expect, and actually presents bling to the horsepower that would not have otherwise been found. So as I listen to you as a real enthusiast, a person who can't stop from learning, you just have such a love of learning, just deep in your kishkas, in your guts. You have no other choice. And I'm guessing that you find spectacularly surprising connections where you least expect them. Can you give us an example of one that might have occurred during one of your so-called musings where something really big hit and it was like, oh, I'm so glad I went down this path?
The magic thing is for sure.
Can you give a concrete example of what might have happened in the process of doing that that might have informed something shocking or surprising?
Well, yeah, I mean, I saw a show, The Mentalist, in Vegas with Jerry McCambridge, and he goes, "Is there an SK in the room? Is there an SK?"
What?
And I was like, "That's me." And some other schlub raised his hand, but he said to the other guy, "Put your hand down." And so I stood up, and he goes, "What are you doing here in Vegas?" And I was, "I'm on a mecation. Don't want to deal with
I've never heard that term. Okay.
Yeah. I'm enjoying this by myself." And he's like, "Oh, that's great." And people laughed. He's like, "I'm sensing that you are working on a big project. Is it a book?" I was like, "Yeah, this is a book." He's okay. "Well, you're nervous. You want it to be a bestseller. You haven't written a bestseller yet." I was like, "You're right." He's like, "Okay." He's like, "What's stopping you? What's stopping you from being a bestseller?" And I was like, "My confidence, maybe." And he's, "I'll tell you, nothing, Scott Barry Kaufman, nothing stopping you from writing that bestseller." And he gave me his magic bracelet. He said, "Every time you feel self-doubt, I want you to wear this bracelet." And I left feeling like, wow, there's so much potential for me to integrate my psychology with my magic to help leave people inspired and believing in a different frame of mind than they believed in before. So that's one story.
It's a great story. And let's face it, Jung, I believe, got it right in many places. I know he didn't really rely on science, but science corroborates it. And if not science, at least common sense does. If I've ever heard of alchemy, that would be it. And I'm sure that you find in the periphery items that are so relevant because you are curious about everything. You, AJ Jacobs, and I think, share something in common. It was attributed to Alex Trebek, and I'm curious about everything, even things I'm not interested in. And I think that creates a far more complete picture. I love your books. I'm going to actually exhume one of them right now on creativity, where you cite something that I've always felt deep in my guts, and that is my best ideas come about in the shower. It was a book on creativity, and you cite the Grohe studies. That Grohe, this German plumbing company that makes great showers and baths, has an entire catalog of creativities that have transpired in the shower. Can you share with the listeners why the shower may be a place of alchemy?
I conducted that study for them.
You were the one who conducted it.
Yes. We did a whole campaign. They gave me free shower heads. I had free Grohe shower heads as a result of it. I didn't get paid money beyond that, but I got free shower heads. Yeah, it was an international study. And we found that more people reported having brilliant insights in the shower than they did at work. And not necessarily with Grohe shower heads in particular, but just any shower heads. But then they create a whole campaign of a particular shower head that will stimulate your thinking. However, I think that a big part of that is that we need to let our prefrontal cortex quiet down a little bit before we really can tap into really, really, truly creative ideas. You know, the most creative ideas are not coming from our loud consciousness or our loud language system. You see a lot of these amazing talents and gifts in autistic savants, for instance.
That's right.
They're nonverbal. And I think there's a benefit to being nonverbal. There's obviously a benefit to being able to access language, obviously, but there's also a great benefit to lowering your focus a bit on your goals, on your stories, all the things you're telling yourself. That's why I think mindfulness meditation is also really valuable. I'm a big fan of, and actually a dear friend of Sam Harris, who talks about how there is no thinker thinking thoughts. Also, these thoughts are not you.
I love that. And rather than saying I'm sad, I feel sad, and kind of distancing it and saying I'm not that. It's not my identity. Little seemingly linguistic hacks make a huge difference. And what you're actually kind of espousing right now, in some ways, we talk a lot about neurodiversity as kind of an external thing, like you want to have a team. I was talking with Temple Grandin, who said that had someone with her strength been on the Space Shuttle Columbia team, it would not have exploded because anyone with her strength would have noticed the defect. And what you're actually talking about in some ways is internalizing neurodiversity and saying, I can be neurodiverse throughout the day. You even talk about it in terms of various traits. I might be more narcissistic at this time of day and less narcissistic at that time of day. And I'm wondering, does that land with you? The idea that we don't have to look for exogenous answers. We can actually look within ourselves, the capacities, the oceans within us, by using interventions. It sounds like the shower might be one place where we can do such things. Can you give some examples of how people might actually expand their own offerings in terms of their own internalized neurodiversity? I don't know if that's a term, but if it isn't, then here's an exclusive.
That's a really cool phrase, internalized neurodiversity. Yeah, we're all have unique brain wiring and ways of seeing the world, in part due to our genes, in part due to our life experiences. So that is true. And for me, self-actualization is that whole process, not a destination. No one's fully self-actualized, but it's a destination where you work toward connecting with that unique creative center of being. And I think it takes constant dedication to that being your compass. And it's perfectly fine to have days where you forget that's your compass, but to have the awareness that you're departing way, way, way from that center, or you're connecting with that center and being able to be in touch with that self-actualizing compass, as I call it, is really important. Carl Rogers, who I'm a big fan of, he called it getting in touch with your organismic valuing process, OVP, but I didn't think that term worked as well as self-actualizing compass. It sounds a little sexual, actually.
It sure does. But it could be orgasmic to be in touch with, I mean, not necessarily sexually orgasmic.
Organismic.
No, I understood, but I was doing a little play on words here. It could be spiritually orgasmic. I'm not talking about sexually orgasmic, to really find that within ourselves, within those oceans that are us, to find that beautiful stuff. And what many of us are doing is we're looking externally for these answers, but within us exist oceans. And I'm just wondering, how have you spelunked into, what are some of the techniques you've used to find the treasures from within? Because when you think about it, you come from a neurodiverse background, you were put into special ed, you had a very wise teacher who said you do not belong here. I imagine that took a while for you to internally extricate yourself from that notion. But what are some of the tools that you have found that allow you to recognize that you are more than the offering that somebody else from the outside might have said that you are?
I think that you have to really trust your own inner experience. People don't know what your inner experience is. And why do we trust other people's views over our own? We're living with it 24/7. Learn to trust it. Learn to befriend it. Learn to believe in it. If you think that you have seeds of potential, yearnings or passions, not everything has to be about potential, but passion or interest or motivation, or wow, I can really sink my teeth into X, Y, and Z. Don't let anyone stop you from moving in that direction. I think you have to really not blame others for your not moving in that direction. You have to just move in that direction and stop thinking that you're in some sort of mental prison that you're not.
There seems to be a chasm between what we know and what we do. And I think many people know this intuitively, but somehow look outside. It's almost reflected by the NASA versus the NUMI. I think I forget the ocean budget, what it's called. But I believe it's something like 1,000x dollars are spent to look outside of Earth, and very few dollars by comparison are used to explore our internal oceans. And I think that that reflects how people tend to look for things. We tend to ask for external validation rather than really spelunk within ourselves and say, okay, I'm going to take some time. I'm going to wrestle with this. I love the term wrestle. Even the word Israel means to wrestle on some level, is what Jacob did in the forest when he transformed. He was wrestling internally. I think we're all called to do that, but very few of us have the frustration tolerance to actually wrestle. And it sounds like you've done that. And really, to the benefit of so many people, myself included, I'm so glad that you did that.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah.
That was very sweet of you. That was very sweet of you.
So let's talk about Rise Above for a second, because it's the perfect name for a book. And the book is awesome and so much fun. Shocker of shockers. It's so much fun to read. And it's so erudite. And you'll laugh at times. You'll be engaged. You'll look forward to the next listen. That's how I did it. I did it through Speechify. If you're reading it, you'll love it. It's a great read. I mean, you write like a person, for lack of a better term. You write with the reader in mind, clearly allowing the reader to access the gems. What caused you to use this real opportunity cost known as time, which I know you don't have a ton of, to say, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to sink it into Rise Above.
Like I was saying earlier, it just became so clear to me that the stories we tell ourselves really inhibit our potential. I also have been seeing a victim mindset everywhere. It really was what got me into this book idea. I was on the Dr. Phil show. It actually was a particular episode of the Dr. Phil show that I realized, wow, this resonates so much with people. I should write a book about this, where I talked about a victim mindset. The whole episode was about victimhood. And I made my point about vulnerable narcissism and how everywhere you look these days, you see vulnerable narcissism, and people really resonate a lot with that. And they all kind of said I was obviously talking about someone else, like their mother or their boyfriend. No one admitted that it was themselves that I was talking about. But nevertheless, I was like, wow, this resonates, and there's a book here.
The notion of transcendence, I think that's really one of the evocative ideas. I believe if we look at vocation, our calling. We are called to rise above. We are called to rise above this static idea that we're in special education for a number of years. We're called to rise above perhaps a call that someone else made about us that, I don't know about you, but I remember a girl in my second grade class said, Adam, you're definitely never going to college. And it stuck. And I had to rise above that. I was wondering if you could share.
You did have to. You sure did.
Yes, I did.
You rose it.
I rose. And it took a long time. You would think that something as ostensibly benign as a second grader saying something like that, except it wasn't benign and it had a long half-life.
I always had this issue with being excluded. Maybe it was from being in special ed, but I feel like almost a cheekiness now when I can be a part of a group that I don't think I belong. It's hard to describe. To be in this world of magicians and to be in all of the secret groups and being able to like discover all the biggest secrets of magic is very exciting to me. It feels like I don't really belong there, but I've been able to infiltrate the inner world of mentalism. It's really exciting. And so this is one example, but I don't know, with everything, when I got into Yale, like Cambridge University, I remember walking around Cambridge University feeling like I don't belong here, but it felt like a real thrill, a real cheekiness to be like, wow, someone with my IQ can walk around Cambridge University as a student. That's pretty crazy.
Like I fooled him. I don't know if you've heard that Billy Crystal title of his book. His autobiography is called Still Fooling Him.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely how I felt. Yeah.
So it seems almost as though rise above is looking at a host of phenomena over which we must rise above. One of them is some of the dangerous aspects of social media where in the zeitgeist, people are saying spectacularly, not just erroneous, but dangerous statements like, if you procrastinate, it must be that you're traumatized. And if you procrastinate, it must be that you're depressed. These are not a one-to-one correlation by any stretch. There are depressed people who do not procrastinate. There are traumatized people who don't either. And there are people who, I believe, procrastinate and they might not have any clinical evidence of either condition. That's one of the things you talk about in the book. You're trying to really, really identify words which are so important, especially if they're not used correctly. I was wondering, could you jam on that a little bit?
You're right. There's this idea that everything is a trauma response right now. And you see it in ads on Instagram. Are you lazy? It's a trauma response. It's annoying because it's a marketing strategy. It's not a real interest in helping the person. Make the person feel like the responsibility completely comes from outside themselves. And I think that a lot of people have had real traumas in their lives, and it really does impact our lives. So I want to be very clear that trauma can impact our lives, and we can have responses that are influenced by various hardships we've had in our lives and patterns. But if we take that responsibility to do the work, we really can rewire and change our somatic responses to things and our own cognitive appraisals of things. And that's only going to happen if we take that inner responsibility to do that work and not just blame others.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. And
Thanks, Adam.
one of the things that you also talk about is that taking responsibility doesn't mean that you are wrong. It means that you are recognizing that the locus, what I infer is that the locus of control, the things that we control are within, and we can't just sit passively waiting for somebody to Rapunzel us out of our tower. And that the only way out is through our efforts, as well as perhaps, I'm guessing, kind of a Wizard of Oz approach or any hero's journey approach, and recognizing that you can have a team. I didn't hear any mutual exclusivity on that, but I did hear in your messaging that it is really up to us to not play victim. And I'm wondering if you could just elaborate on that notion.
Well, first of all, I've been trying to think of a funny, clever way of saying, I actually can't think of it yet. Maybe you can help me. Don't play the victim, play the X.
Yeah.
I don't like the word victor, actually. But what would it be? Play the what? What am I saying? The thing is, you can have been victimized and not have a victim mindset. Those are two different things. You can have been legitimately victimized, but you can still live a life of empowerment.
I heard Michael Meade say that he takes a little bit of issue. He's a mythologist and a brilliant human being who I consider one of the wisest men walking the earth, and who's been on my own podcast twice. And each time feels like a bar mitzvah because it's just a big moment to have him on. One of the things he says is he takes a little bit of issue with the notion of the hero's journey. He says it's too much of an emphasis on the hero rather than the team. But I do see some wisdom in Joseph Campbell's idea of the hero's journey, which comes from Jungian psychology, and the idea that here we are, let's not play the victim in my story, let's play I would say the wounded traveler, kind of to borrow from Yalom, or the wounded hero amongst a cadre of wounded heroes in this kind of Marvel-esque story, rather than just on our own. The lone wolf model works for a period of time, but only to so much effect.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, I'm glad you said that community matters and that social supports matter. They matter a great deal. And for people who have been wounded, to be able to have support groups of fellow wounded travelers is so transformative. To have that support, man, it's absolutely essential. But you can also, I think, have social supports that suck. Let's be honest. There are lots of social supports online for trauma. People get together and they all just blame the world. Think about the social support system of incels. That's social support, but that sucks. They're all of a victim mindset and they're all reinforcing a victim mindset with each other. So I don't think just having a support system is great. It's like marriage. You can be married and you probably could be better off not married.
1,000,000%. And I see it all the time in my office.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I could not agree more. I've taken great interest in friendship and adulthood. And when you talk about the incels and the old idea of we become the average of the 5 people with whom we spend the most time, and that tends to be true. I have a non-clinically validated idea that I love, and it's called the drive-away test.
Okay.
I hang out with Barry Kaufman. We have coffee. How do I feel as I drive away from our interaction?
Ooh.
Was there a nice upload and download? Apparently, Winnicott said something like, true health is demonstrated by one's ability to take in another person's experience and share their own experience with another. Did that happen? Did it pass the Winnicott test? And as I drive away,
let me know.
I already do. I'm feeling very fed. Sometimes I even say, do you feel fed or bled? Because that's really easy to remember. But how do I feel as I'm driving away? Do I feel taller? Or to borrow from Jeff Wetzler, is it a back to self experience where everything I say goes back to the person? That's not how I experience you at all. And you came to me with glowing descriptions from AJ Jacobs, who's the best friend of this podcast, who thinks that you're the cat's pajamas.
He thinks you are too.
Oh, that's so nice. But how do we feel when we drive away? What is our cognitive afterimage? A cognitive afterimage, by the way, folks, is something akin to when you play Tetris for a while and you still feel like you're in Tetris even after it. Or when you hear It's a Small World at Disneyland, so sorry for putting that in your heads, that you hear it for the rest of the day. But what is the cognitive afterimage of hanging out with this person? And I'm guessing that in your life, if we were to look at who brought Barry Kaufman to the fore, it wouldn't just be Barry Kaufman. There would be a long list of credits. And I'm wondering if you could just give a shout out to one of yours.
Oh my God, so many. Anne Fay, who believed in me sophomore year of college when I said, I want to go to Yale and study with Robert Sternberg. And she's like, great, do you want to do an independent study with me? And we could do all the readings on intelligence and let's do what it takes to reach that goal. Man, so appreciative of Anne Fay.
Oh my God, I love that. And I'm going to give a shout out to Alan Greenberger, may his memory be for a blessing, who I met on a Friday afternoon and I told him I was going to drop out of school. He said, great idea. And I said, well, no, I'm not done. And so I ended up seeing him on the following Monday and making a proposition that changed my life, just like you and Anne Fay. Like these people, the Han Solos to Luke Skywalker, of course, the Yodas and the Obi-Wan Kenobis, they all matter in this journey. And that African proverb got it right. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. There's just no question that none of us makes it on our own. And it makes me sad that it's in the zeitgeist. And it also makes me sad that people are investing their one non-renewable asset, their time, to people who, like in this incel group, where they will be diminished as a result. They will have less life as a result of these exchanges.
The last chapter of my new book, Rise Above, is about empowering each other. And I also obviously give examples of disempowering each other. Collective narcissism is a real thing.
Let's go there.
Adam, my man. My man. Collective narcissism, having a group feel like we must be recognized for our greatness, but also we must be recognized for our suffering in a way that they become the central focal point of everything at all times, always. That's not empowering to the group. Collective grievance, there's no forward motion there.
100% agreed. Yeah, I may have mentioned that the question that I often ask, it's a very binary proposition, which I'm not generally a fan of, but it's so simple that does this person or group feed me or do they bleed me? Am I diminished or do I grow? And to borrow from your former colleague.
I love that. I really love that.
You do? Oh, awesome.
Yeah, I really love that.
Oh, I'm stoked to hear that.
And there are many groups that it just doesn't have to be that way. You can have in-group pride without out-group blame or hate. And there are a lot of great examples of groups that will feed you. A lot of examples of groups and cults that are going to suck your soul.
I actually interviewed Daniel Shaw on my podcast, who I found on Netflix. He was talking about the traumatic narcissism of cults and the absence of intersubjectivity and a host of other important things that are the hallmarks of cults. And it's terrifying how suggestible our brains are. We have these yes brains that want to say yes, even when we should say no. I remember watching the HBO documentary on the NXIVM cult and looking at my wife and saying, honey, they would have gotten me. I'm no better. And that was terrifying. It was a humbling moment.
We can all be susceptible. We can all be susceptible, especially in our worst moment, in our lowest moments in life. We can be all of us, easily exploited. I think that from the other end, it takes a lot of responsibility of yourself to be in a position where you could take advantage of someone at their low point or exploit them and you decide not to. To me, that's real character. And unfortunately, we live in a society where a lot of people are lacking that character and are focusing on other things. To me, character matters more than your race, your gender, your everything else.
Any of the demographics, yeah.
I sound like Martin Luther King right now.
Well, it's appropriate. It was just a few days ago.
That's what I'm saying.
So there's a nice little cognitive afterimage there where you're still, and may it carry you through the year until the next Martin Luther King Day, because I think it's a good one to hang on to. I know you're very musically minded, and I'm wondering, are there walk-on songs? Are there soundtracks that you use to empower you through life? Do you have a music bug in your ear a lot of the time? Do you have the ability to disc jockey?
I do, but it's very diverse, from Yo-Yo Ma music to Drake. Started from the bottom. Here I am.
It's so good.
Yeah. I love hip hop as much as I love cello, classical music. So
let's go back to cello for a second, because you are a cellist. And when you hear Yo-Yo Ma, you hear a different Yo-Yo Ma than the Yo-Yo Ma I hear. I sit in awe. You recognize something entirely different. And I wish I could have a USB drive and understand what you understand when you hear him.
But transcendence, pure transcendence. My grandfather was a cellist with the Philadelphia Orchestra. And so I grew up with Yo-Yo Ma and my grandfather and others going backstage and hanging out with them. I have a picture of me from when I was 12 with me, Yo-Yo Ma, and my granddad backstage at the Academy of Music. And I grew up in that way and really been blessed. And there's such transcendence there. Words do not matter when you listen to Yo-Yo Ma. It's not the words, it's the intonations. And it does make you think about people, and where on one level they're talking, but another level their intonation sucks. And it just makes you think that just how like the beautiful transcendence and flow that happens when you're talking to someone, where you feel like there's a transcendence of the language to a real emotional, spiritual connection with a person. And I feel that emotional, spiritual connection to Yo-Yo Ma's music.
And I know you're something of a Maslow head because you bring him up a lot in your work. And I think Maslow is a good place to go. I think that his work really needs to be geeked out to. It's relevant. It's always relevant. It's evergreen.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, thanks for recognizing that. Yeah, I obviously devoted 5 years of my life to writing a whole book about this guy.
Oh, that's so cool. And I'm wondering,
sacrificed a lot of things.
And what I found really interesting, I learned from your colleague, Martin Seligman, that apparently being such a phenomenologist, that Maslow, in spite of his prescient mind, he was unwilling to invite research into his work because he said that his work was entirely phenomenological. And it seems that much of the research validating his work was done posthumously, which I also find just a kind of an interesting aside in my little geekdom. I don't know if you're agreeing with that notion or not, but that's the way I heard it.
I would say Maslow was a philosopher, not a psychologist. I would just say he's a philosopher. And he really, I think, saw himself that way as well. In his early days, he did some really great research in science with the rats on self-esteem and stuff. But when he got into self-actualization, his research of self-actualization was a lot of it, his frameworks for humanistic psychology. It's really a philosophy. And what I try to do now is integrate with my self-actualization coaching program. I try to integrate humanistic psychology with the science of positive psychology. But to me, the science of positive psychology doesn't really have a philosophy. I like the philosophy of humanistic psychology, and I think the integration of both is great. If the philosophy of positive psychology is just it's good to be happy, then there's something deeper we can get at. And I like the existential humanistic psychologists for what they brought to the table in terms of that.
And finding meaning and trying to do something with this dash between our birthday and our death date, and
that
really
dash, yes.
That damn dash. And we got to go with it. Memento Mori is
not even an M dash. It's not even an M dash. It's just a dash.
It's just a dash. Before we go, I must ask you, what are some things that you put into practice on the regular that you've noticed have had a huge ROI in your life?
You want my protocol? I'm joking.
Are you kidding? The Scott Barry Kaufman protocol? Hell yeah, I'm in.
For me, it's a lot of it is I live a very inspiration-driven life. I don't really believe in doing the same routines every day. I think that some days and some moods and some states of consciousness are right for certain parts of the creative process, and some days you're right for a different part of the creative process. You have to view life as this ongoing stream. You have to be prepared to meet it where you are. And for me, I found that not having a boss is helpful. Being able to set my own hours so that I can really work with the flow of my life. I think it's really hard for a lot of people in 9-to-5 jobs with deadlines. I don't know how often they're really connecting with the deepest recesses of their soul versus just trying to focus on pleasing the boss and getting the deadline done. So that's really worked well for me. It sounds trite, but exercise is such a lifesaver. Being able to go for a brisk walk once a day. You don't have to go crazy, but little things do bring some really, really great returns. In giving, reaching out to others and making conscious, intentional decisions in your life to help someone with their life versus be indifferent to their life. Not everything it's either hurt or help. There's indifference and then there's help. There's intentional help. If you can make the choice to go from the indifference to the intentional help, I think that will obviously help the other person, but it'll help you more than you will realize in terms of your soul and your consciousness. I had great joy. We created our first Abraham Maslow scholarship for our coaching program, and to be able to give out some of those scholarships is very soul affirming when you read about some of these people's stories, what they're going through in their lives. It also makes you appreciate your own life better. You're like, Jesus Christ, I'm glad I'm not going through that.
Yeah. There's an old joke. The husband asks the wife, honey, do you love me? And the wife says, compared to whom? And having a basis of comparison is really an important part of our brains. And sometimes that is one of the ways out of our internal spiral, is realizing, hey, take a moment. Let's get some perspective. The fact that this particular TED Talk that I had submitted for, it was not accepted. It's not going to be the end of my life. I will be fine. There are people who are suffering worse, and I don't suggest that that be the default, but I think that's a useful one to have in one's artillery from time to time.
Definitely. And mindfulness, having a regular mindfulness practice where you learn to just sit with yourself and be comfortable with just sitting with yourself and just being is huge, 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 huge thing, because we're always trying to change our state, no matter what the state is. We're always trying to be happier. We're trying to, why do I feel this? Why do I feel that? Just learn to stretch the muscle of being, and you will paradoxically be happier.
I could not begin to agree more. And I see positive psychology in all of its incredible, I mean, the volumes of research and the rigor behind the research to kind of compensate for the possibility that might be perceived as this fuzzy science studying happiness, this immeasurable thing.
It's a flourishing science.
Magnificently so.
So many great researchers. I think we have a mutual friend, Todd Kashdan, maybe, or he was on your podcast.
Oh, love that guy.
Yes, because he speaks very highly of you. So I assume that you guys know each other. And he's done a lot of rigorous research. Robert Biswas Diener, his father, Ed Diener, real rigorous work showing that life satisfaction matters. To be able to improve and boost people's life satisfaction on this planet, you're doing a great service to the world.
I'm so grateful to these folks. Think about Ed Diener and his prescient mind that he would realize that, yeah, I will come up with a satisfaction with life scale, SWLS. You can look it up online. It's free for personal use. And you can see a baseline, like asking yourself, I think it's 5 or 7 questions. It's very small. And you rate them 1 to 7, and you do it again 2 weeks later after the intervention. I do this with a lot of my folks, and it was written, I think, in 77 or something like that. It remains current. It still works. And then his son, of course, the Indiana Jones of positive psychology, has been a total badass. So just amazing.
Yes, I was trained with him. I became a certified positive psychology coach with Robert Biswas Diener. So
did you go to University of Pennsylvania for the MAPS thing?
Oh, no. I mean, I was a professor in the MAP program, but I took the Positive Acorn program. Robert Biswas Diener has his own program for coaching.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, no, for MAP, I was one of the professors there. Yeah.
That's so cool. I've not yet had him on, but I intend to. I'm a fan of his work. He's very cool.
You should have him on.
For sure.
I give you other recommendations. There are a lot of unsung heroes in the field of positive psychology, people you will never have heard of, but are doing the best science out there. It's not always a one-on-one correlation there between those who speak the loudest in public and the best science.
It's so true. And I was glad that you brought one of my favorites, one of my lunch buddies, Fred Luskin, who's studied forgiveness and is the director of the Forgiveness Studies program at Stanford. Just a brilliant man. And this book is great. Seriously, Rise Above. It's not optional. You got to get it. It's what we are called to do in this life. If you think about everything that has mattered in our life, on some level, it has had an element of rising above.
Yes.
It could be an external assessment. It could be an internal assessment of ours. But regardless, it's what we are called to do. It's obviously not what we're called to do all the time. If you're sad and you listen to a sad song and you move through the sadness and you're grieving, and you never once suggested that grief needs to be risen above, you go through the grief. But there are things that we must rise above. You know what? I'm going to go with the last one. You have no idea how many times I was smiling and just saying, oh my God, amen, my brother. One of them was the notion of trigger warnings and the fact that it takes certain pieces of very relevant information off the table because we don't necessarily agree with the point of view or because it might upset us. And you clearly take issue with that. And I was glad that you called it out, and it fits perfectly under the rubric of Rise Above. Let's just talk about this very troubling phenomenon that is going on whereby information that is entirely relevant to our lives could actually go through, I'm going to say it, an Orwellian process through which it is erased because it might trigger someone. I'm sorry for saying it with such a blunt object, but what are your thoughts?
We're not always privy to someone else's triggers, and you have to be aware of that and give people a little grace and take a little bit more responsibility of how you're going to show up in the world. And if you're avoidant or fearful of anything that could be the slightest trigger, you're also blocking yourself from the opportunity for growth and the opportunity to be able to withstand certain things, especially if they're just words. Being able to train yourself to deal with words is a lot more empowering than training yourself to avoid certain words.
Yeah, one of the models that I got around anxiety is that the more we avoid a thing, the more anxiety for it can grow. And I'm not suggesting that somebody who's been through a legit trauma and has perhaps a PTSD response or an acute stress disorder response or just really further inflame. I'm not suggesting that people must go through re-experiencing of those things, but there are levels. And it seems that saying that this person cannot speak at our school because his opinions differ. And that's, I guess, what I'm driving at is we still need to hear those voices. We still need to be in dialogue.
Well, it's an interesting time right now. We don't need to get into politics.
And this podcast does not.
It's an interesting time. I think that a lot of things are going to be reversed now, is all I'll say.
And I'm able to infer some of what you're not saying.
I think the ones that used to not be let on campuses will now be let on campuses and will be featured on campuses. And then the ones that I just think it's going to be complete. And I would argue that both directions is not good. It wasn't good before, and I don't think it's going to be great now, to be honest.
A friend on this podcast, Daryl Davis, who is an African-American musician who regularly attends Ku Klux Klan rallies, has befriended people within the Klan, not for the sake of saying I agree with you, but for the sake of actually engaging in dialogue. And as a result, he has well over 200 KKK robes. He basically engages in something akin to motivational interviewing. For those of you who haven't listened to the Stephen Rolnick interview, get into it. It's really good stuff. Without dialogue, there can be no positive change. And by opting out and saying, I'm not willing to go there when it's within our abilities to sustain it. And I'm not talking about really sensitive populations who will have a 2-week-long trigger response. That's not what we're talking about, I believe.
Especially in a scholarly environment, you want good scholarly ideas to be debated, but also be recognized that there are some ideas that not everything needs airing, even if there's free speech.
That's true too. Well, Scott, is there anything I haven't asked before I go that I should have asked?
Adam, this is such
I've got a final question for you, bro.
What a delight. Yes.
Scott Barry Kaufman, if you had the power to confer upon all humanity one insight or skill that would dramatically improve the lives of the individual, and since we are all connected, perhaps people around them as well, what would that skill or insight be? And how do you imagine it would improve the life of the individual as well as people around that individual?
Self-hope. Because you believe in yourself, because you believe in your ability to rise above and be resilient, and you believe you have the inner resources that can handle and withstand whatever comes your way. You don't need trigger warnings. You don't need your hand held in a way. Sometimes it's nice to have your hand held. I'm not going to lie, but
I personally need that.
In a way that, in an empowering way, an empowering, supportive way, not in a pity way.
Right.
If you can really develop and cultivate the skills of self-hope, you really will go far in this life.
That's wonderful. And I believe some of that, just to give a tip of the hat to Rick Snyder, I believe had something to do with some of the early studies of that.
And Shane Lopez, but they focused on hope, agency and pathways to get there.
Wonderful stuff. Scott, you have no idea how long I've been wanting to interview.
Adam, I'm so delighted. I'm so touched.
Thanks again for blessing my listeners.
Thank you, Adam.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsay thanking you for listening to SuperPsyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.